Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Today, we are covering the manufacturing CRM playbook. We have three great members of our delivery team here with us today. They work with clients every day and help us kind of put together what are the three main areas that if you're considering a CRM implementation, that you can consider in advance to really set yourself up for success. And so, obviously, this topic could be really deep. We could probably do a session on each of the three areas that we're going to cover today. But what we want everyone to walk away from this webinar with is just a couple things in each area that if you can start planning for this now, give a little thought to it, it'll really set you up for success. So we'll go ahead and dive in here. So, if you're considering a CRM, there's a lot of different reasons. A few of the common ones that we hear from manufacturers when they're coming to us today, sales cycles are getting really long. There's a lot of people involved. A lot of times it can be national, international, and a lot of custom quoting involved. So perhaps all the manual systems that you used to rely on, or maybe an older CRM just isn't cutting it anymore. There's also a lot of complexity in the manufacturing space. So all this customer data, order data can live in a lot of different systems, some that you own, some you may not own. And so the importance of getting all that data into one source of truth and making sure that it's all communicating with each other. Again, these outdated tools, manual processes, it makes it a lot harder to manage all of your clients, all of your relationships, and your team as well, and how they communicate with each other. And then it can also hold you back from scaling. So if all these things aren't working together, it's hard to make those smart and nimble decisions. And so a CRM can help fix all of these problems. However, what we find is that if you're not properly prepared before starting a project like this, it can actually exacerbate some of these issues too. So it's still possible to have the right technology and still miss out on opportunities or still have a poor customer experience. It can still be hard for your teams to connect. It can still be hard to drive these decisions with data if everything isn't clean and talking to each other, and if your team doesn't understand really the value of why you're doing it. So these are the things that we're trying to avoid, and kind of get you thinking about a little bit today and help you prepare. So we're going to intro the team here. We've got three great people with us, and they're each going to take a different area and kind of give you a few solutions to combat these issues that we usually see. So Tina is going to kick us off. She's our user adoption specialist. She helps teams with change management and training, and she's going to give us a few value-based adoption strategies today of how you can really start thinking about setting your team up for success long before you actually go live with your new CRM. Elise is a RevOps strategist with us. She helps clients really optimize their HubSpot instance and drive revenue. But today she's going to talk with us about how clean data and really preparing what you have today and aligning that with your goals is going to help you get the most out of it once you get all the way to that optimization phase two. And then Dave is our Director of Technical Solutions. He's going to talk with us a bit about system architecture, integrations, and really how you want to think about aligning that with your goals, so that you can get the most as you scale and as you think about kind of security and how you're going to grow in the future as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tina and she can get started, share a bit about user adoption with us.
Sure. Thank you, Sophie. Go ahead and roll to that first slide. I'm definitely going to kick us off by talking about and these are some of the things that Sophie pointed out as well, some of those common goals and challenges that come up when manufacturing organizations want to adopt a new CRM platform. And basically, they can be thought of as falling into four buckets, which you see here on your screen: data, collaboration, integration and scaling, and then my main area, which is change management. So we or manufacturing organizations often have these goals of what they want the CRM to be able to do for them. But there are often challenges that are associated with those goals. And sometimes it's hard to know how to move from what your goal is get over what the challenge is in order to have a smooth and successful user adoption. So that's really where change management comes into play. And this is where I'm going to focus my time today, or my part of this presentation today, because it really will help mitigate the challenges that you see in the first three buckets. And of course, Elise and Dave are going to come in, particularly as it has to do with data and integration, and also talk about some common pitfalls and how to mitigate for those two. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we think about change management, we think about change management as the vehicle that's going to get us to user adoption. So we think change management is the process, and then user adoption is the outcome. We can also think of change management as a series of activities that we're going to take our users through so that we are changing their mindsets so that we can then change their behavior. And ultimately, that behavior is we want them to adopt and use the system. And we want to think of it in that order, the mindset to the behavior, and not the other way around. So we don't want to just say, well, they're going to use the system because we told them to. We're actually going to build them up so that user adoption is more successful. Now, when we do change management, we don't want to just do it willy-nilly. It's not fluffy. It's not woo-woo. It's not just getting everyone in a room and saying, well, how do you feel about it? It's actually taking our users through a tried and true framework. And the framework that we use most often at Dynamico is a framework called ADKAR. And that's actually a framework that's been put together by an organization known as ProSci that does a lot of certifications and a lot of research around change management. It's been around a long time because it works. And it particularly works well in manufacturing spaces where teams, organizations, processes are very process driven, and teams are very well established in their work patterns. So in general, the ADKAR framework is an acronym for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And we take people through these in several stages, and we never want to skip a stage. So we want to make sure that we're building the awareness of the need for change, that we're giving people a chance to really desire to want to make the change. And then we're going to come in with training and make sure that we give them the knowledge and the ability to actually do what we need them to do within, in this case, the CRM platform. And then we want to make sure that we pay attention to reinforcement and basically making sure that we're rewarding people for that change in behavior. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we get started? Well, I could actually do probably 15 minutes by itself on all the things that you can do during each of those phases. But in the interest of time, I'm going to start with step one, and that is conducting stakeholder interviews. Now, again, there's a methodology for this. There's a whole list of questions that we can ask people. We're not just putting them in a room again and saying, well, how do you feel about the work that you do? There's some specific inputs that we want to get from them around what they do today and how we know the adoption of a CRM system is going to impact them in the future. Then we can use some of those inputs in the communication that we make to them. And this is where we're starting to build that awareness and starting to build that desire, because we're going to tell them why the change is important. And most importantly, we're going to map it to some of those specific use cases that they have brought up that are causing them pain. So if we've set up the awareness and the desire correctly, then knowledge and the ability piece, which I mentioned was training, is going to be much better because there's actually going to be some context around it. So we're actually training people in the context of what the change is going to be, how it's going to impact them, and how some specific processes are going to be made easier. We're not just coming in and doing training in a vacuum where we're talking about the features of a platform, but there's really no context to the end user. And then finally, we want to make sure that we reinforce adoption. It's very easy once our CRM gets up and running to say, okay, we've got it, we're good, and just be off to the races. But we want to make sure that we are constantly checking for people actually getting in and using the system and then rewarding them for using the system. So finally, often when people think about change management, again, they think of it as this fluffy sort of nebulous thing that is good to do if we have time, or maybe during the latter part of the training, or maybe right before training, we want to throw something in. But actually, we can tie user adoption to measurable goals. So measurable goals and outcomes. So we want to make sure as we're planning to do a CRM system upgrade or maybe an implementation for the first time, that we, throughout the first part of the process, that we're saying what are the metrics that we're going to have that define us being successful? How is change management going to help us change behavior so that people will use the system? And then when we go back in to look 6 weeks, 6 years, or 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years later, what types of things have we seen throughout our different departments that have told us that user adoption by way of change management has been successful? So some of those metrics are what you see here on the slide. For sales teams, that might be higher lead conversion. Why? Because they've adopted the system. And in doing so, that means that some of the administrative lift off of getting stuff in the system, off of tracking, off of doing activities, all of that sort of thing has been lifted. And so we can see the fact that they are now can concentrate more fully on converting their leads, on actually doing the business of selling. And so they're having higher lead conversions and also shorter sales cycles. That can also lead to improved forecasting. So if you've got a better quality lead and you've got more confidence in the revenue associated with that lead, that means that your forecasting is going to be more accurate and more dependable. Marketing can also see the results of user adoption through improved lead quality in much the same way that sales does. They also have the ability to better target and better segment when they're doing outreach campaigns, trying to get prospective clients in. That's going to lead to better campaign effectiveness and performance overall. And that will bleed down to so that when they're finally handing off those clean and qualified leads to sales, that leads to better alignment between sales and marketing. And lastly, our customer service teams, when they've adopted the platform well, we see that come up because they're having to look maybe in fewer areas to find the information that they need to service clients. So that means that first call resolution rates are going to be improved. So they're able to resolve things on the first call or the first touch. That also means that they've reduced the amount of time in those touches, such as average call handling time or average time to respond to emails. That leads to overall customer satisfaction. And then all of those things roll up to, on an organization-wide level, increased revenue and ROI. So now I'm going to toss it over to my colleague Elise to talk a little bit more about data migration strategies for CRM in the marketing, in the manufacturing space.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. So when we talk about data migration for manufacturers, there are just some things to consider that we see when we work with clients. And a lot of it goes back to people have a lot of systems and a lot of structures within those systems. So we have clients who have systems that are 10, 20 years old that they still like to use, as well as people that are still filling out spreadsheets, pieces of paper, and index cards that we then have to figure out how to get into a CRM to make their lives easier. Along with that, they also have account structures that have some parent-child relationships, or they work with other companies to sell into certain accounts that have to be taken into account before we can really set up a CRM. Selling models might be different if they're working with distributors or partners or regionally. And then just the sales cycle is quite long, and the buying cycle can start at the beginning of the year. They don't finish till the end, and there's a lot of relationships and history behind clients that will kind of shape how we set up the CRM once we're in there. So just making sure that data is correct before we go into a new CRM is how we like to approach these things, to make sure that we're not popping a team into a CRM to train with Tina and they're confused as to all the data that's in there and it might not make sense. So when going into a new CRM like HubSpot, the first thing we kind of think about is what is the source of truth going to be for your organization moving forward? Um, Generally, when this is chosen, we know that everything we're going to bring in is going to be clean, and knowing that this is where everyone's going to look kind of holds everyone to a standard of let's put the right things in for the right people to see. Um, in order to make sure that everyone has the same visibility and understands this is how we're using things, this is what we're training on, this is the data we want. And to do that, we look at the data that we want to bring in and the goal of that data, whether it's coming in net new or if we have to pull over historical. And then we have to decide who owns that data throughout each phase of the project, because as much as we'd like to say it's a click a button and it's all in, it just isn't. So just ownership between teams, resources, really comes into effect here because we want the right people owning the data if things need to be updated or if the organization kind of shifts goals or what they're pulling in. So the kind of strategy we work with is audit, clean, and map. So we generally say garbage in is garbage out. We don't like to bring in dirty data into your new CRM. So if things aren't clean beforehand, it generally leads to a new piece of technology with data that's not useful. And then that really hurts adoption, like Tina talked about, because people are using stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense. Along with that is systems that we're either migrating with or pulling data out of are generally inconsistent with each other. So looking at what data makes the most sense, what formats do your team members like to use things in, and how can it be digested? What's the easiest way to bring that into your new CRM? And then having a plan. If we go in with no plan and treat it like the Wild West, generally 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road, usage drops, people are unhappy. There's a lot of this technology doesn't work. Why are we doing this? If we kind of do this on the front end, clean things up, put a plan in place, we generally see that teams are happier, they adopt better. And then like Tina said in her slides, there's better lead quality, sales tend to happen quicker, communication is cleaner between sales and marketing, service teams have more visibility into what they need to do, so it just works from the get-go better for teams all across the board, although it does seem like a lengthy process right when it started. So the first step and kind of the longest step is the audit of all systems. Generally, tech stacks aren't just one or two um, pieces of technology, and in some cases, those spreadsheets, emails, pieces of paper, post-it notes, what have you. So kind of going through and looking at all the systems that your teams touch, whether that's sales, marketing, service, operations, whatever is going to impact the contacts that you guys deal with on a day-to-day, is something that needs to be audited for what should come over, what shouldn't come over. And while you're kind of going through these audits, we have to look for things like, do you have 5 records with the same email addresses? Do you have people with partial emails or no emails, or you have phone numbers for some people and not others? What needs to come over, and should we complete those records before we bring them in, and what's important to your org? Also looking at outdated information if you're kind of on that B2B route of have businesses closed, do you not work with certain people anymore because you're not a vendor? Really kind of narrowing down on what's important to bring in, what information do we need, and is it up to date before we pull it into your new CRM? Generally makes it easier to let your team hit the ground running because they're not running into issues like email addresses not working, these accounts we don't actually talk to, we shouldn't have renewals for accounts that no longer exist. So cleaning beforehand generally just makes your sales process a little easier, and the marketing team can kind of get to the right people. They're not having bounced emails, and keeping you guys' kind of like domain and email sending scores really clean. Thank you, Sophie. And then how to clean up these CRMs, we kind of look at a standard naming convention across the board so everyone is on the same page, whether it's naming businesses, how dates are set up, contact records, if you're typing in what you're using them for, if there's like organizations in different states, if you're using things like that, kind of cleaning up what that looks like so it's like same across the board. That way when they do get to the training phase, everyone's on the same page, and Tina can easily show people how to learn these things. And then looking at what's important to bring over and what's not. In these systems, we can see people with thousands of properties, so understanding what people actually want to bring over and use. Obviously, contacts, deals, accounts are important. Things like someone's wife's birthday, maybe not as important, but it'll work its way into a CRM every once in a while. And then making sure that obviously the duplicates get removed. And then when we're migrating data over, we can trace it back to say, this happened correct. This is what was supposed to come over. This is what we need moving forward, so that we just can double check that the migration goes well, everything's in there the way it should be, and we only have the data that's the most important coming in. And then the fun part, the mapping. Looking at whatever technology you're using beforehand, and then HubSpot in this case, and figuring out a mapping plan. So if they're native fields that both your current software and HubSpot have in place, like first name, last name, those are easy to map. And then when it comes to fields that might be unique to your organization, coming up with customizations in HubSpot to map to those fields so that you guys are getting the right info. Big thing here is paying attention to what fields need to come over, if like deals have to connect to contacts, or if you guys use a ticketing system, making sure those custom properties match what the route is. So if tickets match to tickets, companies match to companies, contacts match to contacts. That's the big thing we see, is making sure, because HubSpot does give you the ability to map to multiple different parts of the hub, making sure the data coming in, although it might be in one place, maps across the new software so that your team can find the right thing in the right spot moving forward. Best practices. These are big ones for us, especially the bottom with scalability and flexibility. They all kind of feed into that. So just making sure you know who owns your data flow, the rules of the data, and how this is going to scale. Having these keys kind of in one person's hands is a little bit important, but making sure all the teams know, like, how are we mapping our customers? Why is it important? Why are we mapping our products certain ways? As long as each team understands their mapping and how they're going to work, it helps data move easily. And then just establishing the rules that go along with these things, whether it's managers own data, team members are responsible for their data, making sure that people are checking in and there's rules in place. So if something does go awry, a flag gets raised right away and we can fix problems out of the gate. And then when you're going to bring in new data, making sure that, is this scalable? Is this flexible if we change? Those are just three big important things that we keep in mind when we go through best practices. I'm going to kick it to Dave now.
All right. Thanks, Elise. So I'm going to be talking about the integration side of the business, right? So Elise kind of took you through a data migration sort of, journey. Data migrations are typically used at the beginning of implementations, when you actually have to set up the system, get the data in, get it in right, or when you're implementing a new feature on an already existing system. So you need to take all that data from all those other places, put it into the new system to leverage that correctly. If you have to do that more than once or on a regular basis, you're probably looking at something automated, like an integration, to make sure that that happens through a system rather than people's, physically pushing buttons. And that just helps with, efficiency. It helps if someone's on vacation, you make sure that that data is still moving, and it eliminates human error. So really, when we start looking at an integration, we have to ask ourselves, the why, the what, the how, and the where. So why are we integrating is the first question, right? You'll see a lot of folks who think, they've got a whole bunch of data all over the place, and it'd just be great to put it into the new system too. So you have to be really careful about making sure that you're not just duplicating data for the sake of duplicating data. You really need to think about your business case and what the end users are going to get out of that, so you can properly train and plan. So all those things that Elise just covered still apply to this. And I would say that discovery and the planning and the data cleansing and then the data migration is a precursor to an integration. So if you're jumping into an integration without thinking about those things, you probably haven't really sat there and thought about, why are we doing this particular thing? Next is identifying the what you're trying to do. And so there we go. All right. It's all right, Sophie. And so Elise covered that as well. What are you trying to move over? So if you've done a data migration or if you've done that discovery, you probably already know what the what is. So that's pretty easy, right? You're just determining what data, what objects you're moving over, and then making sure that it's available to the users. The next thing is it gets into a little bit of muddy water for especially non-technical folks. It's how are we moving that data over, and how often is that happening, and in what direction does that data need to move? So is it a one-way integration from your ERP system to your CRM every night to bring over new contacts or new orders, those kinds of things? Or are we doing things in the CRM system that have to move back into that ERP system? And that just adds a lot of complexity, right? The big thing here, is it going to be real time? So do we need to have that data immediately? As soon as one system changes, we need to know in the other system. Is it something that we can batch nightly for you tech geeks out there? Does it need to happen async, right? So the difference there is usually real-time things. They're like one shot. Like I click a save button in one system and that data moves to all the other integrated systems very, very quickly. If you've got a lot of data, a lot of repeated data, things that don't necessarily have to happen in both systems at the same time, you should consider doing background processes asynchronously, batching them for efficiency's sake, save network bandwidth, that kind of thing. And the last thing is determine where this integration needs to take place. So where does the data move when it's going from system A to system B? And that's usually more talking about your tech stack, right? So when you think about how does a migration happen, that could be flat files, it could be a system doing that for you. Data integrations are almost always automated systems. And you start to have to think about, are you looking at a cloud infrastructure? Is there some sort of server script that you can set up to make this happen? And that really defines your tech stack. And what we'll talk about next is what types of integrations you can look at. So is it native, middleware, custom integrations? Next slide, please, Sophie. There we go. So I won't go through all of this, but the takeaway here is no two integrations are the same. You can kind of block them up as, some integrations are fairly simple and straightforward, fairly lightweight, and some of them can be very, very technically complicated and very, very complex. So typically we break it down into 4 buckets. There's native integrations where HubSpot has tie-ins to other systems, where you can just flip a switch in HubSpot and the integration happens after a little bit of configuration. There's a second level of that where you need a little bit more than that sort of plugin or add-in can do for your system. And this is where we start talking about low-code, no-code frameworks like Workato, or even doing some custom coding in workflows and things like that inside of HubSpot. So that's sort of that next level up where you need a more robust automation system. Then we start talking about, building into custom APIs. So if there's typically like an ERP system where it has, maybe it's older, maybe it's like an AS400 system, or you've got a sophisticated on-premise ERP ecosystem, then we have to start looking at the various APIs that we may have to do some custom work against. And then once you start talking about custom work, you might have to start talking about the more complicated category, which is the pro dev, right? Do you have to take this up into a platform? Do you have to do custom, staging for that data to do your transform process when you're moving things over? And then you have to start thinking about security and data orchestration to make sure data moves over in the right order at the right time without interrupting your users and corrupting your data. So these can really be as simple or as complex as you want or need them to be. Next slide. The big thing to think about with integrations is it's not just a matter of tying 2 systems together and turning them on and moving data over. There are a lot of things that organizations need to think about when doing things like this, and it almost all falls around the governance and compliance and the scalability of this thing you're looking at. So when you're thinking about doing an integration, one of the first things you should ask is, what are the frameworks or the compliance policies that we have to adhere to when we're implementing whatever we're thinking about implementing? So limiting data exposure, protecting your endpoints, hardening your network to make sure that you're not exposing it to, the global internet and malicious actors, right? And that really means planning for compliance like SOC, ISO, PCI, GDPR, whatever, industry regulations you have, that kind of thing, to make sure that you're not accidentally exposing yourself, your data, and your client's data to something that it shouldn't be exposed to. And then tying your architecture into future growth. So a lot of the no-code platforms, low-code, no-code platforms are great for getting a basic integration started. And the scalability and capabilities of those platforms varies platform to platform. So if you've got simple data structures, maybe you're just moving over contacts to contacts, low code, no code, maybe a great option for you. When you have to start integrating a bunch of systems, maybe some cloud ecosystems, you have to do a lot of data transformation, then you have to start looking at something that's a little bit more scalable, probably some pro code work here, right? So again, as easy or as complicated as you need it to be. Just make sure that you're considering compliance at every step. Next slide, please. So before you start getting into building any of this stuff, there's a lot of questions that you have to ask. Elise already covered several of these, but I'm just going to cover some of them again, right? So what's your most valuable customer data, and where does it flow from, right? So think about your user journey and what they have to do. Think about the data points that they have to touch and when they need that data to come through, right? Uh, who needs visibility into what and when? That ties into the timing again, but it's also about reporting, right? So nobody likes a report that's out of date and you have to wait for a nightly batch to go. So, you just have to know what your business needs, when those reports and things need to be available, when do your dashboards need to be available for your users, and what does that really do to enable or hamper your business if you're not planning that out correctly. Um, Integrations are really about solving pain points. So the third bullet point here is, how do you get from systems A, B, and C into system D to maybe unify your data, to make sales lives easier, marketing lives easier, to enable certain things in your business that are probably manual or tedious today, right? That's when integrations can really help. And then think about obviously the future of your business. What does your business look like in 3 to 5 years with this integration? Um, you know, a lot of times what you'll see with integrations is people jump into them because they think it's just really easy to move data over. And they run their business in a way that, creates a lot of little integrations and technical tie-ins, and you create this sort of spaghetti network of all of your data. And sooner or later, you start to realize that that's a scalability problem. So making sure that you're really understanding what you're trying to do for your business and how that's going to impact your business in the future is an important consideration to have. And then last but not least, making sure that you're paying attention to your compliance needs before you actually start clicking buttons. So here's just some examples of some types of some types of integrations that we work with at Dynamico. Obviously you can integrate anything as long as it's got an API or a database you can tie into. But these are some of the typical ones. I won't go through each and everything on this list, but it's just some good examples. So when you're thinking about the type of integration that you want to do, what are the systems you're trying to tie together? What are the tools and methods that you're using to make sure that that data is flowing from point A to point B in an efficient way? And then what is the business outcome that you're trying to achieve for your business, your users, your clients, what have you? So making sure that you have a clear understanding of the outcome before you integrate is a key part of deciding everything else in between.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. All right, Elise and Tina, we're going to bring you back in here too as we kind of close out today. I know we covered a lot here. We did build this into kind of a checklist for you into these 3 phases. So if you registered for this, whether you're watching live or getting the recording later, you'll get that. We know there was a lot covered and it kind of breaks down what to focus on in each of these steps. But as we close out, I kind of just want to bring each panelist back in and kind of say, what is one thing kind of from the area that you spoke about today that you wish people knew about kind of at the beginning of their project that would set them up for more success? So this could be kind of a misconception that people have or just something that is kind of skipped in the planning process. And so Dave, can I kick it to you first?
Yeah, I think with data integrations and architecture, especially folks that don't have strong IT staff inside of their organization, they typically tend to underestimate the complexity of things like data migrations and integrations. It's you tend to hear comments like, "Oh, it's just a flat file, like import it and it'll be fine." But as Elise illustrated, right, there's a lot of consideration that goes into making sure that data is clean. And then, as I was speaking about in my slides, there's a lot of timing issues that come in with that. So just understanding that when you start talking about moving data between systems, there's a lot of complexity uh, that it takes a lot of consideration to do it right, right?
Absolutely. And then like maintaining those long term too, as we were kind of talking about this, once you integrate, it's not just a set it and forget it, right? You have to keep in mind that you're going to have to either internally or with a partner be able to maintain those over time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that gets forgotten too. These aren't just fire and forget systems where you build it up once and it just works, right? The ecosystem of your network evolves over time. HubSpot's going to advance. Your ERPs are going to advance. There will be new security protocols that come into the space, and you really need a partner that's either watching that for you and or can be there when things do break, and familiar with your system to make sure that you stay up and running and it doesn't impact your business negatively. 100%.
Awesome. All right, Elise, can we kick it to you?
Yeah, I think going off what Dave just said about it's kind of not a set it and forget it. I think that ties in really well with understanding who holds the keys, because a lot of times we'll hear, oh, this person's our IT admin or HubSpot admin, and they're responsible for everything that the partners are doing and these integrations and migrations. And then that person either moves jobs or even moves internally, but is no longer handling it, or the org grows and other people need to get their hands kind of dirty with these integrations as they scale. And we've given the keys to one person within the org and they didn't document. It's really hard to kind of untangle the web, even if your integration's set up perfect. It's kind of hard to untangle and figure out, why do we do this? Why didn't we choose to do this at that point? Should we be doing something new? So just relying solely on a single resource or one admin um, creates a long-term risk, because we can't predict what's going to happen down the road to that single person. So understanding who needs to know what to just have their ear to the ground without being involved in day to day is super important. And then just documentation from day one and continually making those updates when, like Dave said, things scale and change is important, because that can be handed off super easily versus having a 90-day period of we need to figure out who did what and why. You don't want to recreate the wheel every time you need to change something.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I feel like we could take that away in a lot of different areas of business too, right? Not just CRM.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And then Tina, do you want to jump in on this as well? Something from the change management side that you wish people thought about or maybe misunderstand.
Yeah, this is kind of cliche, but and it's a well-worn adage, but I think it's apropos in that if you build it and build it well, people will come, meaning people will see the light without you having to do anything else. So, a platform like HubSpot, which is very user-friendly and very intuitive, and then you're following and doing all the right things to get all of your data in there. And so kind of feeling like, well, it's, all of our stuff is there and the system is really intuitive that we don't really need to train people. We don't really need to bring them around. They should just see how cool and how amazing it is and how it's going to work for their life. And we don't really need to do anything else. So we're just going to kind of do that. And I think that's a mistake, that you can put a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources into some of those areas that Dave and Elise covered, as well as just the HubSpot platform itself. But if you don't have a plan for getting your users adopted, again, that shift in mindset to affect behavior and not the other way around, then you're going to have something that you've invested a lot in that is just not going to get a lot of use.
That human component, absolutely. Can't skip it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, we're going to follow up whether you're here live, watching this as a recording. You'll get an email from us. It's going to include this as a more simplified checklist, just some things to keep in mind. And then, of course, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, this is kind of a lot of steps here for us to all manage. Of course, Dynamica, we're here. This is what we do every day, as you hear from our team. This is what we help clients through, and we'd love the opportunity to work with you as well. So you can always reach out to us, and we'd love to talk about your project. So thank you so much. We'll let you all get back to your days, and thanks so much for joining us.